The autumn storm hit the forests of Asheville like a warning from nature itself. Wind tore through the pines, sending showers of rain across muddy trails, and lightning split the sky in brilliant, jagged streaks. Sheriff Daniel Brooks adjusted the collar of his raincoat and glanced down at his partner, Rex, a 6-year-old German shepherd whose instincts had saved lives more times than Daniel could count. Rex's ears twitched as he sniffed the wind, and his deep brown eyes reflected alertness and focus. They were out on what had been a simple missing hiker call, but Daniel already felt that the woods held more than lost campers tonight. Branches snapped under the wind and puddles formed in every depression along the muddy path. Daniel's boots sank with each step, making him acutely aware of how difficult the terrain had become. Visibility was minimal. Rain battered his face, dripping into his eyes, but he didn't stop. Rex was ahead of him, tugging slightly on the leash, moving with purpose. Every so often, Rex would pause, nose to the ground, tail rigid. Daniel followed, trusting the dog implicitly. Years of working with Rex had taught him that when the dog locked on a scent, it was serious. Suddenly, Rex stiffened. His hackles rose and he let out a low, warning growl that reverberated through the empty forest. Daniel halted, scanning the darkened woods. "What is it, boy?" he asked quietly, crouching down. Rex's nose twitched in the air, then he turned and bolted forward. Daniel shouted but quickly followed, slipping over wet roots and mud. The path was treacherous, but there was no stopping Rex. His urgency was contagious. After what felt like an eternity of splintered branches and soaked earth, a shadow appeared through the rain. A small, nearly invisible wooden cabin tucked between dense trees. Its roof sagged under waterlogged shingles, and smoke from a long-dead fire pit spiraled into the stormy air. Daniel's heart skipped. Cabins weren't uncommon in these woods, but something about this one felt wrong. There was no light inside, no movement visible, and yet Rex was pawing at the door, whining softly, urging him to enter. Daniel grabbed the doorknob. It was wet and icy under his fingers. The door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing a small interior dimly lit by the storm's light filtering through the broken windows. The smell of damp wood and mold hit him first, but then something else caught his attention, a faint, irregular rhythm like shallow breathing. He moved carefully, scanning the room. That's when he saw her. She lay in the far corner of the cabin, curled slightly, one hand resting over a small, round belly. Her clothes were soaked and torn, and her skin was pale, almost translucent in the dim light. She wasn't moving except for the faint rise and fall of her chest. Daniel's stomach dropped. She was pregnant, and she was alive, barely. Her eyes fluttered weakly as though trying to resist sleep, or maybe something darker. "Rex," Daniel whispered, kneeling beside her, "we've got to get her out of here." The dog pressed close to the woman's side, his head resting lightly on her arm. Daniel could see her lips quivering as she murmured incoherent words, her eyes flicking toward the cabin's dark corners. "Don't let them," she whispered before falling silent again. Daniel's pulse quickened. Who was she hiding from? And why had she ended up here alone in a storm that could kill even the hardiest hikers? He reached for his radio but hesitated. Moving too fast could worsen her condition. Every second mattered. Rex growled low, ears pricked, and Daniel realized that the dog had sensed something the human eyes could not. Danger wasn't just in the storm, it was in the secrets she carried. He gently lifted her into his arms, careful of her fragile condition. She moaned softly, shifting slightly but not resisting. Rex walked alongside, growling at shadows that moved in the storm outside the cabin's broken windows. Daniel felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him like the storm itself. This wasn't just a rescue. This was a life-and-death mission, and the forest seemed to conspire against him. The trek back to the road was treacherous. Roots twisted underfoot, and rain-slicked stones threatened to send them tumbling. Daniel adjusted his grip on her as Rex ran slightly ahead, scouting, keeping them on the safest path he could find. Hours felt like minutes, and every crack of lightning made the forest seem alive with ghostly movements. Yet Daniel refused to falter. This woman and her unborn child depended on him. Finally, the edge of the woods appeared. The road was partially flooded, but Daniel spotted flashing lights, paramedics had arrived, navigating the storm to meet them. Relief washed over him, though he remained focused. He carefully handed the woman over, explaining her condition in rapid bursts: hypothermia, exhaustion, dehydration. She was barely conscious, and every moment counted. Rex nudged her hand, his presence grounding her amidst the chaos. The dog who had led them to her now refused to leave, growling softly at anyone who came too close. Paramedics stabilized her, but Daniel's mind raced. Who was she? Why had no one reported her missing? And what had driven her into the stormy woods, hiding in a nearly abandoned cabin? The woman's faint whisper haunted him. Don't let them. Don't let them what? The words were incomplete, but Daniel felt their weight. Danger still lingered, unseen but tangible, as though the storm itself carried a warning. As the woman was loaded into the ambulance, Daniel stood beside Rex, watching her pale form on the stretcher. The storm's fury seemed to ease slightly, as though nature itself was holding its breath. Rex pressed his head against Daniel's leg, tail wagging weakly, a silent hero in the chaos. Daniel knew this was only the beginning. Whatever secrets the woman carried, whatever dangers had chased her into the forest, would soon follow them. But for now, they had survived the storm. They had found her. And Rex had proven that instincts, loyalty, and courage could cut through even the darkest night. Daniel took a deep breath, rain dripping from his hair. The storm might have passed the physical world, but the storm in Emily Carter's life had just begun. And they were going to uncover every shadowed truth, every hidden danger, one step at a time. For now, he whispered to Rex, "Good work, boy. We found her." And the dog, unwavering as always, simply rested his head against Daniel's leg, ready for whatever came next. The ambulance's tires splashed through the rain-soaked roads as the storm continued to rage over Asheville. Inside, paramedics worked feverishly to stabilize Emily Carter. Her breathing was shallow, her lips pale, and her eyes flickered weakly as she tried to remain conscious. Daniel Brooks rode in the back, holding her hand, while Rex sat alert on the floor beside the stretcher, his gaze unwavering. Every jolt of the ambulance made Emily flinch, and Daniel instinctively whispered soothing words. "You're safe now. You're going to be okay." The paramedic, a seasoned woman named Lisa, checked her vitals. "Hypothermia, severe dehydration, and exhaustion," she reported, eyes narrowing. "She's pregnant. We need to keep her stable. Any movement could trigger complications." Daniel tightened his grip. His mind raced, trying to anticipate every possible danger. Emily's condition was fragile, her life hanging by the thinnest thread, and yet she was still alive. That was the miracle Rex had found. Without him, they might never have reached her in time. Emily stirred slightly, mumbling incomprehensible words. "Don't let them." Her voice was so faint that Daniel leaned close, straining to hear. He frowned. Who was them? And why did she look so terrified at the thought of being discovered? Every instinct in Daniel screamed that this was bigger than a lost hiker. Someone had driven her into hiding, and possibly into danger that extended far beyond the storm. The ambulance lights flashed through the rain, reflecting off puddles like shattered mirrors. Rex growled softly, his ears angled toward the back of the vehicle. Daniel glanced over. A car had been following at a distance, moving cautiously through the treacherous roads. He frowned, heart pounding. Could someone have been tracking Emily even in these woods? The thought made his blood run cold. He reached for his radio. "Dispatch, any reports of suspicious vehicles near the cabin area?" Static answered. "Negative," the dispatcher replied. "The storm may have interfered with radar and road monitoring. Nothing on record." Daniel's stomach sank. That meant whoever was following her had been clever, patient perhaps, and willing to wait for the perfect moment to strike. He looked at Rex, who gave a low growl and pressed closer to Emily. The dog's instincts had not been wrong once, and Daniel knew they wouldn't be wrong now. The ambulance reached the hospital in Charlotte, where the emergency team was ready. Doctors swarmed around Emily, transferring her to a stretcher, hooking her up to monitors and IVs, and checking the baby's heartbeat. Daniel stayed by her side, never letting go of her hand. Rex followed, growling softly at anyone who came too close. The hospital staff exchanged confused glances, but Daniel only nodded. Rex's presence was essential, not just for Emily's comfort, but for her protection. As the doctors worked, Emily's eyes flicked toward the doorway. Fear was written in every line of her face. She tried to shrink back, her hands clutching Daniel's tightly. I can't, they'll find me," she whispered, voice trembling. Daniel squeezed her hand. "No one is going to hurt you, you're safe now." But Emily's trembling persisted. She had been hiding for weeks in the cabin, avoiding threats that had seemed impossible to escape. Now, even in the hospital, the memory of danger clung to her like a shadow. Rex sensed her anxiety and nudged her hand, tail wagging gently. Emily's gaze softened, and for the first time in days she allowed herself a small measure of relief. You found me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Daniel nodded. "We did, and we're not letting anyone take you again." The storm outside had forced her into a vulnerable state, but it was also the storm that had brought Daniel and Rex to her side. Without them, she might have never survived the night. Then the hospital doors opened and two men stepped inside. Their expressions were polite, almost rehearsed, but Daniel immediately noticed their unease. They introduced themselves as relatives, claiming to be there to help. Emily's eyes widened and Rex barked sharply, stepping between her and the men. Daniel's instincts flared. Something about them didn't sit right. "Who are you really?" he asked. The men hesitated. "We just want to make sure she's okay," one replied. Daniel's gut told him otherwise. Emily's whispers grew urgent. Don't let them," she tried to say more, but her strength faltered. Daniel tightened his grip and looked at Rex. The dog's growl was low and menacing. He understood the warning. These men were not there to help. Someone had been following her, waiting for the moment she became vulnerable, and now they had found her in the hospital. The thought sent a chill through Daniel's spine. He would not let them take her. Not now, not ever. The doctors continued their work, monitoring Emily's vitals. "She's stable for now," one reported. "But she's extremely weak. She needs rest and protection." Daniel nodded, glancing at Rex. The dog had been a silent guardian, and he would continue to be. Outside the hospital room, the storm raged on, but inside a different kind of battle had begun. One of fear, secrets, and protection. Daniel knew that this was only the beginning. The woman they had found was more than just a victim of the storm. She was a woman with a past, a secret, and a life that needed saving from threats far beyond the forest. As the night deepened, Emily's breathing steadied slightly, but her eyes remained wary. She kept glancing toward the door, expecting someone to enter. Daniel spoke softly. "You're safe. For the first time in a long time, you're safe." She nodded weakly, tears brimming. Rex pressed his head against her arm, a silent reassurance. Outside, the storm began to ebb, the rain slowing to a soft patter. But inside the hospital, a different storm brewed. A storm of fear, secrets, and the unknown danger that had chased Emily into the woods. Hours passed, and Emily finally drifted into a fitful sleep. Daniel remained at her side, silent but vigilant. Rex lay close to her, ears twitching at every sound. The hospital room was quiet, but the tension lingered, palpable as the night air. Daniel knew that when she woke, the questions would begin. Who had sent her into hiding? Who had threatened her? And what secrets did she carry that had made her a target? Despite the uncertainty, one thing was clear. The bond between Emily and Rex had saved her life. The dog had followed a scent, defied the storm, and led Daniel to a woman on the brink of death. Without him, she might never have survived the cold, the rain, or the fear. Daniel watched her sleep and felt a deep sense of gratitude for his partner. The night had been long, but they had reached safety. And yet, Daniel knew that the real race against time was just beginning. Emily's story was far from over. Her life and her unborn child's depended on uncovering the truth behind the threats that had forced her into hiding. But for now, in the quiet hours of the hospital, she slept, protected by the courage of a man and the loyalty of a dog who refused to abandon her. Outside, the storm clouds drifted away, leaving only the promise of what lay ahead, a journey of survival, justice, and discovery that would test them all. The night at Charlotte Hospital stretched on, rain pattering softly against the windows as Emily Carter lay in a hospital bed, fragile and trembling. Her breathing had steadied, but her wide, fearful eyes never left the door. Every shadow, every unfamiliar face seemed like a threat. She flinched when anyone approached, except for one presence. Rex, the German shepherd who had refused to leave her side since the moment he had found her in the cabin. His loyalty was unwavering, his instincts keen, and Emily seemed to sense that he was her only true guardian. Officer Daniel Brooks sat nearby, watching her carefully, thinking back to the moment they had found her. The storm, the cabin, the fear in her eyes. He would never forget it. Yet now, in the safety of the hospital, a new kind of tension took over. Emily was safe from the storm, but not from the unseen threat that had driven her into hiding, who had chased her into the woods, who had forced a nearly full-term pregnant woman to seek refuge in a remote cabin. And why had no one noticed she was missing for weeks? The hospital room door creaked open and two men stepped inside, moving carefully. Their expressions were calm, polite, almost rehearsed. "We're relatives," one said. "We were worried and wanted to see her." Emily's eyes widened and she instinctively shrank back into the hospital bed. She clutched Daniel's hand tightly, her knuckles white. Don't let them," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible, but Daniel caught every word. Something about these men set his instincts on edge. Rex growled low, a deep, warning rumble that vibrated through the room. He stepped slightly in front of Emily, positioning himself like a barrier. Daniel watched the men carefully. Their calm expressions felt unnatural, their movements too precise. "We just want to help her," one said, placing a hand on the back of a chair. Daniel's gut told him otherwise. He had worked with Rex for years and had learned that a dog's instincts often outpaced human reasoning. Rex had never been wrong, and he certainly wasn't wrong now. Emily's breathing quickened. They'll hurt me," she whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel squeezed her hand, whispering reassurance. "You're safe. I won't let anyone hurt you. Not now, not ever." The men glanced at him, suspicion flickering in their eyes, but they said nothing. Daniel's gaze hardened. Something was deeply wrong here, and he vowed silently that Emily would not be taken back into danger. Unable to leave the hospital room, the men lingered near the doorway, asking questions in a calm, almost rehearsed tone. "Where were you?" one asked. "What happened to you?" Emily's lips trembled as she tried to answer but could only whisper fragments. I had to leave, I could." Her voice broke, tears forming in her eyes. Daniel's stomach clenched. She was terrified of revealing too much, yet he could feel the weight of her story pressing down on them all. Finally, Daniel decided to act. He stepped closer, placing himself between Emily and the men. "I need you both to step back," he said firmly. "You're not here to help her. Leave." The men's polite expressions faltered, replaced by irritation. "We just want to ensure her safety," one said sharply. Daniel shook his head. "No, you're not safe for her. I won't allow it." Emily's eyes widened, gratitude and fear mixing in equal measure. Rex growled, tail stiff, backing Daniel's warning with instinctive authority. Once the men left, the hospital room fell into tense silence. Emily curled into herself, exhausted by the encounter. Daniel sat beside her, his hand still holding hers. "It's okay," he said softly. "They're gone for now. You're safe here. I promise." Emily exhaled shakily, finally closing her eyes for a moment, trusting that for once someone would protect her. She knew that if she revealed her full story, danger might follow, but she had to start somewhere. Rex nuzzled her hand, offering comfort in a way only a dog could. Over the next few hours, Daniel began piecing together fragments of Emily's past. His research with local authorities uncovered a startling revelation. Emily Carter had previously lived in Atlanta, where she had been reported missing several months earlier. Oddly, the official missing person report had been withdrawn under unclear circumstances. No one had contacted her family, and no trace of her movements had been recorded. It was as if she had vanished without a trace, until now. Emily had been hiding for a reason. Daniel discovered that she had been in an abusive relationship with a wealthy and powerful fiancé. Threats, intimidation, and coercion had kept her under his control, forcing her to live in fear of leaving. When she became pregnant, the threats escalated, and she realized her only chance for survival was to escape. She had fled to the remote cabin in the mountains, avoiding roads, towns, and anyone who could reveal her location. And she had survived the storm, the isolation, and the treacherous terrain, thanks in large part to Rex's instincts and unwavering loyalty. The pieces began to fit together, but questions remained. Who had been watching her in the hospital? Were they connected to her fiancé? And what secrets had she managed to take with her into hiding? Daniel knew that Emily's survival was only the first step. The danger that had chased her was still out there, hidden in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity. He looked down at Rex, whose sharp eyes scanned the room. The dog's vigilance mirrored Daniel's own determination. They would not allow Emily to face this alone. Later that evening, Emily finally spoke more clearly, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought no one would ever find me," she said. "I couldn't call for help, I had to hide. I didn't want them to know where I was, and I couldn't trust anyone." Daniel nodded, understanding her fear. "You don't have to trust anyone right now," he said gently. "You have me, and you have Rex, that's enough for now." Emily's tears fell quietly, relief mingling with lingering terror. She had escaped death and captivity, and yet the weight of her story still pressed heavily upon her. As the night deepened, Daniel continued to gather information, coordinating with law enforcement in Atlanta to verify her history and track any potential threats. Each revelation painted a picture of a woman who had endured unimaginable fear, survived against the odds, and carried within her the most precious life of all, a child. Rex remained at her side, a silent sentinel, occasionally nudging her hand or resting his head against her arm, reminding her that she was not alone. At dawn, Emily's condition had stabilized, and the hospital room was quiet except for the soft hum of monitors and the occasional growl from Rex when a nurse entered or left. Daniel watched her sleep, thinking about the storm that had started it all, the violent winds, the rain, the cold nights, and the treacherous forest path. It had all led to this moment, to her survival, and to the first step in uncovering the truth. Without Rex, she might have remained lost, a victim of circumstance and fear. With him, she had hope. Daniel knew that the next phase would be even more challenging. Protecting Emily in the hospital was only temporary. Soon, they would need to confront the threats she had fled, uncover the full extent of her fiancé's abuse, and ensure that justice was served. But for now, as Emily slept and Rex lay close, Daniel allowed himself a moment of gratitude. Against all odds, they had found her. They had kept her alive. And in a world that had tried to erase her existence, they had proven that courage, loyalty, and compassion could make the difference between life and death. The storm outside finally began to wane, leaving behind a wet, quiet world. Yet inside the hospital room, a different kind of storm lingered, the storm of secrets, fear, and danger that had chased Emily into the woods and beyond. Daniel tightened his grip on her hand one last time, whispering softly, "You're safe. We'll keep you safe." Rex nudged her gently as if to echo the promise. And for the first time since the storm had begun, Emily allowed herself to believe it. The next morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the storm-clouded skies above Charlotte, casting pale beams across the hospital room. Emily Carter lay awake, exhausted but alert, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of the hospital blanket. She had survived the storm, the cabin, and the trek through the woods, but the danger she had fled from was far from over. Daniel Brooks, still by her side, sipped his coffee quietly, observing her. Rex rested nearby, head on his paws, ears twitching with alertness. The dog had been a lifeline in the forest, and now he remained her silent protector. Daniel began asking gentle questions, careful not to alarm her. "Emily, can you tell me more about why you were hiding?" Emily hesitated, eyes flicking toward the doorway as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. I couldn't go home," she whispered, voice trembling. My fiancé, he would find me." Daniel leaned in, encouraging but calm. "We'll keep you safe. I need to understand so we can protect you fully." Her eyes filled with tears, and she finally began to speak. She revealed the truth slowly, every word weighted with fear. Her fiancé, a wealthy and influential man from Atlanta, had been controlling her life for months. He monitored her phone, her emails, even her social interactions. Threats had escalated when she discovered his illegal dealings, financial schemes and manipulations that could destroy people if exposed. Emily had confronted him once, hoping he would change, but the confrontation had ended with violent threats. She realized then that escape was the only option. When she became pregnant, the situation worsened. The child represented freedom, a life outside his control, and he became relentless in his demands. Emily had tried to leave several times, each attempt thwarted by surveillance, intimidation, and fear. She had nowhere to go, no safe place to hide. The cabin in the Asheville Mountains had seemed like a last resort, a remote sanctuary where she could survive until the danger passed. She had never expected the storm to nearly take her life. Daniel listened, absorbing every detail. He understood the stakes now. Emily's survival was about more than escaping the woods. It was about escaping a man whose influence and power made him a constant threat. He knew law enforcement in Atlanta would be cautious, but with Rex's instincts and Emily's testimony, they could build a case. Still, the danger remained immediate. He glanced at Rex, whose eyes were fixed on the door, ears perked. The dog's vigilance never wavered, and Daniel drew strength from it. While Emily rested, Daniel coordinated with authorities across state lines. He began verifying her story, her residency in Atlanta, the reports of abuse, and the withdrawn missing person report. The deeper he dug, the more disturbing the revelations became. Emily had been living in fear for months, her every move monitored, every escape carefully blocked. She had not vanished due to negligence or accident. She had been hunted. The cabin, the storm, and Rex's intervention had given her a chance that she otherwise might not have had. As the day wore on, Emily grew restless. "I can't just stay here," she whispered. "He'll come, he'll find me." Daniel shook his head firmly. "Not if we do this right. We're going to make sure you're protected and we'll bring him to justice. You don't have to face this alone." Tears rolled down Emily's cheeks as she realized the truth of those words. For the first time in months, someone was on her side, not to control her, but to protect her. Rex nudged her hand again, and she let out a small, trembling laugh. The hospital staff remained vigilant, aware of the sensitive nature of Emily's case. Security measures were increased, access restricted, alarms monitored, and officers stationed nearby. Yet even in safety, Emily's mind wandered back to the cabin, to the dark forest, and to the storm that had nearly ended her life. She remembered how cold, alone, and terrified she had felt, and how Rex had found her, refusing to leave her side. The memory brought tears, but also gratitude. The dog had been her first hope, the first sign that she might survive. Later, Emily confided in Daniel more details of her fiancé's manipulation. He had used money, influence, and fear to control her and others around her. Friends who had tried to help had been silenced. Even authorities had initially dismissed her concerns, either intimidated by his power or unaware of the full extent of his actions. She had learned quickly that survival required secrecy, vigilance, and courage. And yet she had escaped, thanks to her own determination, her careful planning, and one dog's unerring instincts. Daniel and Emily developed a plan. They would secure her location, coordinate with law enforcement, and gather evidence of her fiancé's crimes. But first she needed to recover. Rex lay near her, ever watchful as Daniel explained the steps they would take. "We'll make sure he can't hurt you or your baby, but you have to trust the process. You're not alone anymore." Emily nodded, clutching the blanket to her chest. The weight of fear still pressed down on her, but for the first time there was hope, real hope. Over the next several hours, Daniel began piecing together the timeline of Emily's flight. She had escaped under the cover of night, traveling only by foot and staying off roads whenever possible. The cabin had been her sanctuary, hidden and isolated, a place where she could rest and regain strength. The storm had trapped her inside, leaving her vulnerable, but also setting the stage for Rex's heroism. Daniel marveled at the dog's instincts, realizing that without Rex, Emily might never have survived the treacherous journey. Emily rested that night, exhausted but finally feeling a measure of safety. Daniel sat beside her bed, thinking about the road ahead. Protecting her would require careful planning, coordination across state lines, and vigilance against someone who was powerful and determined. Yet Daniel felt a quiet confidence. He had Rex, a dog whose instincts were unmatched, and Emily, whose courage and will to survive had brought her this far. Together, they would face the storm of threats yet to come. As the first rays of morning broke through the clouds, Emily gazed at Rex, her silent guardian. She realized that survival was no longer just about escaping, it was about reclaiming her life. The cabin had been the beginning, the storm had been a trial, and now, with Daniel and Rex by her side, she could begin the journey toward justice. The past would not define her anymore. She would face it, uncover the secrets that had threatened her, and ensure that no one could ever hurt her or her child again. In that quiet hospital room, surrounded by monitors, security, and the unwavering presence of a dog who had saved her life, Emily allowed herself a moment of peace. She would need strength for what lay ahead, but for now she could breathe. The storm had passed, at least for the moment. Yet Daniel knew that this was only the beginning. Emily's past was filled with danger and deceit, but with patience, courage, and careful planning, they would confront it. And Rex would be there every step of the way, the hero who had refused to abandon her when she needed it most. By the 5th day in the hospital, Emily Carter had grown a little stronger. Her breathing was steadier, and her body had begun to recover from the weeks of hiding in the storm-lashed cabin. Yet her eyes still carried the weight of fear, a shadow that refused to lift. Every creak of the hospital floor, every unfamiliar voice made her tense. Only Rex, the loyal German shepherd, offered her comfort. He lay beside her bed, his head resting gently on the mattress edge, ears pricked at any sound. She would not meet anyone's gaze without him nearby. Daniel Brooks sat beside her, watching her carefully. He had spent hours piecing together her past, confirming the details of her disappearance and the abusive control her fiancé had exerted over her. But until Emily herself spoke, the picture was incomplete. Daniel understood that this woman had survived unimaginable fear and isolation, and now, with safety within reach, she had to find the courage to speak. "Emily," he said softly, placing a reassuring hand over hers, "you've been through so much. We need to know everything so we can protect you fully. You're safe here." For a long moment Emily hesitated. Her lips trembled and tears formed in her eyes. I don't know if I can," she whispered. Daniel squeezed her hand. "You can. You're not alone anymore, not with Rex, not with me. Take your time, but we need to hear your story." Emily took a deep, shaky breath and began. She told Daniel everything, every moment of fear, every threat, every secret she had been forced to keep. Her fiancé, a wealthy and influential man in Atlanta, had controlled her life completely. He had monitored her emails, her phone calls, and even her interactions with friends and colleagues. When Emily had discovered his illegal dealings, financial manipulations, threats to business rivals, and potentially criminal activity, he had tried to silence her. First with threats, then with intimidation, and eventually with violence. I realized I couldn't stay," Emily whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Every time I tried to leave, he found me. He threatened my family, my friends, everything I cared about." She swallowed hard. "And when I found out I was pregnant, I knew he would never let me go. I had to hide. I had to run." Her voice cracked as she recalled the terror of fleeing to the mountains, carrying only what she could hold, her body exhausted, her mind consumed with fear. Daniel listened, his heart heavy but steady. He had seen fear before, but the depth of Emily's ordeal was staggering. She had survived months of control and manipulation, all while carrying a child. "You were brave," he said softly, "and you're not alone anymore. Rex found you and will make sure you're safe from now on." Emily's eyes softened as she looked at the dog. Rex nudged her hand gently, as though acknowledging her gratitude. In that moment, Emily understood that he had been more than a companion. He had been her savior. Emily continued, recounting the night she had fled. "I ran through the storm, the woods. I thought I'd die out there. The cabin, it was the only place I could hide. I didn't have food, I didn't have water, I just prayed someone would find me." Her voice shook as she remembered collapsing in the cabin, her body nearly giving out. "And then Rex found me. I don't know how, but he found me." Daniel squeezed her hand again. "He knew you needed help, that's what he does. He never gives up on someone in danger." Her story shifted to the mysterious men who had appeared at the hospital. They came for me," Emily said, shivering. "I thought they were family, but I knew they were. They wanted to take me back. I don't know what they would have done, but I was terrified." Daniel nodded grimly. The investigation had already confirmed that the men were connected to her fiancé, likely sent to retrieve or intimidate her. The danger she had fled from had followed her, even to a hospital in another state. Emily's fear had been justified. As the hours passed, Emily recounted more details of her fiancé's control. He had tried to manipulate everyone around her, using wealth and influence to isolate her. Friends who had offered help were silenced, authorities in Atlanta were hesitant to act, and she had realized that her only chance of survival was complete secrecy. Every choice, every step she had taken in hiding, had been a matter of life and death. Her voice was raw, but the courage she showed in telling her story was undeniable. Daniel, now fully aware of the scope of the danger, began planning their next steps. Emily's testimony, combined with the evidence they had collected, could build a case strong enough to bring her fiancé to justice. But they had to act carefully. Emily needed protection, and the law enforcement coordination had to ensure that the threat could not reach her or her unborn child. He glanced at Rex, who seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. The dog had saved her once and would help protect her again. The hospital day stretched on. Emily's exhaustion returned and she sank back into the hospital bed, tears flowing freely. "I feel like I've been running forever," she said softly. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've survived the worst. Now we make sure he can't hurt you again." She nodded, exhausted but grateful. I just want my baby to be safe. That's all I care about." Rex nudged her hand once more as if to confirm her wish. In that moment, the dog and the man beside her shared the same mission: keep her and her child safe, no matter the cost. That night, Daniel reviewed the evidence they had gathered. Documents hidden in the cabin, photographs of threats, and testimonies from friends who had witnessed abuse all painted a damning picture of Emily's fiancé. The story she had told was verified at every turn. What she feared had been real. The danger was real. But now, with her story told, a plan could be made. Emily's courage had set the stage for justice, and Rex had ensured she survived long enough to see it through. In the quiet hours of the hospital, Emily finally slept, her breathing deep and even. Daniel stayed by her side, alert and vigilant, while Rex rested close to her bed, ears twitching at every sound. For the first time in months, Emily allowed herself a measure of peace. She had faced the storm, both literal and metaphorical, and survived. The storm outside had passed, but the true challenge, facing her past and bringing the man who had threatened her to justice, was just beginning. As dawn approached, Emily awoke briefly, gazing at Rex. "I don't know how I survived without you," she whispered. The dog nudged her hand gently, tail wagging softly. Daniel smiled, placing his hand over hers. "You didn't have to survive alone. We found you. We're not letting anyone hurt you again." And for the first time in weeks, Emily felt hope. The truth she had feared sharing was out, and with it came the power to reclaim her life. Rex had found her, Daniel had believed her, and together they would face whatever came next. The storm of Emily's past was far from over, but now she had allies. She had her courage, her will to protect her child, and a dog whose loyalty had no bounds. And Daniel knew that with careful planning and relentless vigilance, the threats that had chased her into the mountains would be confronted and ended. Emily had survived the forest, the storm, and the fear of being hunted. Now, the battle for justice, protection, and a future free from fear was about to begin. The hospital room was filled with quiet tension, broken only by the soft hum of monitors and the occasional shuffle of nurses outside the door. Emily Carter's breathing was uneven, her hands clutching the hospital sheets tightly. Her belly moved rhythmically with the baby's kicks, a reminder of the fragile life she carried inside her. Daniel Brooks sat beside her, holding her hand, while Rex rested alertly on the floor. The dog's ears twitched with every distant sound, his instincts as keen as ever. Emily had survived the storm, the woods, and months of fear, but the hardest challenge yet was about to begin: childbirth. The labor began unexpectedly in the early morning hours. Emily's body tensed, her breaths quick and shallow. "It's starting," she whispered, panic flickering across her face. Daniel remained calm, brushing her damp hair from her forehead. "We've got this. Breathe with me. Focus on the baby," he instructed gently. Rex nudged her hand reassuringly, resting his head on her shoulder as if to tell her, "You are not alone." The dog who had saved her life now provided the courage she needed to face the next trial. Nurses and doctors hurried into the room, adjusting monitors and preparing for delivery. Emily's heart pounded, not just from pain but from fear. Memories of the storm and the cabin flashed through her mind, the isolation, the cold, the desperation. Yet in this moment she focused on the present. Every contraction brought pain but also hope. Daniel coached her patiently, counting breaths, reminding her to stay steady. "You've survived worse. You can do this," he said. Emily nodded, gripping his hand as tears streamed down her cheeks. Complications arose quickly. The baby's heartbeat dipped intermittently, causing tension to spike in the room. The lead doctor, a calm and experienced obstetrician, instructed the nurses, "We need to move fast, prepare for possible emergency interventions." Daniel's chest tightened. Emily's eyes widened with fear. Will the baby be okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Daniel squeezed her hand reassuringly. "We're doing everything we can. You're both strong. You've made it this far." Rex growled softly at the edge of the bed, his instincts alert to every sound, every movement in the room. Hours passed like minutes as the team worked tirelessly. Emily's body exhausted itself with each contraction, yet she continued to fight, motivated by the life growing within her. Daniel whispered words of encouragement between contractions, and Rex stayed at her side, a steadfast sentinel. The hospital room became a battlefield where courage, skill, and instinct collided. Every heartbeat, every push was a test of survival, not just for Emily, but for the child she carried and the life they had both fought to protect. Finally, the moment arrived. With one last powerful push, the cries of a newborn echoed through the room. Relief washed over everyone. The baby's lungs filled with air, her tiny fingers curling instinctively. Daniel exhaled deeply, his hand still holding Emily's. Tears of joy and exhaustion streamed down her face. "She's here, she's alive," Emily whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Rex whined softly, nudging her hand, tail wagging with an almost human sense of pride. The dog who had found her in the cabin now celebrated the new life that depended on her survival. The obstetrician handed the baby to Emily. Her small, warm body pressed against her mother's chest, and Emily's tears flowed freely. "You're safe now," she whispered, rocking the newborn gently. Daniel stood beside them, overwhelmed by emotion. "You did it. You both did it," he said softly. The room, once filled with tension and fear, now overflowed with relief and joy. Rex pressed closer, nose nudging Emily's arm as though acknowledging the miracle he had helped make possible. Even as happiness filled the room, Daniel knew that vigilance could not end. Emily's past still loomed, threats still existed, and her fiancé remained a danger. Yet in this moment, none of that mattered. A mother and child had survived against incredible odds, and the bond between them, and the dog who had guided them through the storm, was unbreakable. Emily whispered to Rex, voice soft and full of gratitude, "You saved us. I don't know how to thank you." Rex wagged his tail, resting his head against her arm, already knowing no words were necessary. The media later hailed Rex as a hero, but Daniel knew the truth. Rex acted purely from instinct and loyalty, driven by a sense of duty that humans could only admire. He had guided them to Emily in the storm, stayed by her side in the hospital, and helped her face the terror of labor. The dog had ensured survival not once, but twice. Emily, holding her newborn daughter, understood the depth of that loyalty. Without Rex, she might never have had the chance to cradle her child, to feel the warmth of life she had fought so desperately to protect. As the hours passed, Emily rested with her daughter in her arms. Daniel took notes for the investigation, preparing for the next steps in bringing her fiancé to justice. Yet he frequently glanced at Rex, whose eyes never left Emily and her newborn. The dog's presence provided comfort, reassurance, and a silent promise. No harm would come to them on his watch. Emily's fear, though not entirely gone, was tempered by the knowledge that she was no longer alone, that she had allies who would fight alongside her. At nightfall, Emily whispered stories to her newborn, recounting the storm, the cabin, and the dog who had saved them both. Daniel quietly observed, moved by the strength and resilience of the woman who had endured so much. The baby, tiny and fragile, curled against Emily's chest, a symbol of hope and survival. The storm outside had passed, but the challenges of life and protection were just beginning. Still in that room, surrounded by care, vigilance, and love, Emily allowed herself a moment of peace. The birth of the child marked more than a medical event. It was a triumph over fear, abuse, and adversity. Every breath Emily and her daughter took was a victory. Rex, lying alert but relaxed at her side, had ensured that triumph. Daniel knew that their journey was far from over, but in that hospital room, the bond between human and dog, mother and child, protector and survivor, created a force stronger than any storm or threat. By the following morning, Emily held her daughter tightly, smiling through exhaustion. She looked at Rex, who wagged his tail softly and whispered, "We did it together." Daniel smiled as well, pride and relief evident in his eyes. The storm that had begun in the Asheville woods had ended in this moment of new life, resilience, and hope. Emily's courage, Rex's loyalty, and Daniel's steadfast protection had combined to bring her safely through the darkest hours of her life. Though Emily's journey was far from complete, legal battles, emotional recovery, and the ongoing threat of her fiancé loomed ahead. This night had proven that survival was possible. One dog had followed his instincts, refused to leave a human in need, and guided her toward a future she had thought impossible. A new life had emerged, not just the baby, but Emily's as well. She could hope, she could fight, and for the first time in months she could feel safe. The storm had passed, but Emily Carter's journey was far from over. In the quiet of Charlotte, the hospital room felt safe, yet a lingering tension remained. Emily cradled her newborn daughter, her hands trembling slightly from exhaustion and emotion. Daniel Brooks sat beside her, reviewing reports and coordinating with authorities in Atlanta. Rex rested alertly on the floor, his ears perked for any unexpected sound. Though the immediate danger of the storm and labor had passed, the true battle, the one against the threats from Emily's past, was about to begin. Daniel had spent hours verifying Emily's story. The evidence of her fiancé's abuse, threats, and illegal dealings was substantial. Emails, financial records, and witness statements painted a damning picture. Yet he knew this was only the beginning. Powerful men often wielded influence in ways that went beyond simple legal recourse. Emily's safety depended not just on justice, but on careful strategy, vigilance, and timing. Rex, sensing the urgency, remained at her side, offering calm and protection. The dog had led them through the forest, protected her in the hospital, and now would guard the next chapter of her life. Emily's fear returned intermittently, a shadow that clung to her even as she held her daughter. "Will he come after us?" she asked quietly, voice trembling. Daniel shook his head gently. "Not if we do this right. You're not alone. We have law enforcement coordinating with us, and Rex isn't going anywhere." The dog nudged her hand reassuringly, tail wagging softly. Emily allowed herself a small smile, recognizing that her survival, through the storm, the labor, and the weeks of hiding, had not been a fluke. She had allies now, and she would not face this alone. Within days, a plan was formulated. Law enforcement officers from Atlanta and Charlotte coordinated to ensure that Emily's fiancé could be confronted safely and legally. Protective orders were enacted, surveillance established, and security measures put in place at the hospital and beyond. Daniel worked closely with Emily to prepare her emotionally for what was to come, emphasizing that truth and evidence were on their side. "You've survived everything else," he told her. "You can face this too." Emily nodded, her determination beginning to replace fear. The day of the confrontation arrived quietly, yet Daniel, Emily, and Rex were all vigilant. Law enforcement had arranged for Emily's fiancé to be summoned under the guise of legal questioning. He arrived unaware that Emily had survived the storm, the cabin, and her escape. As he entered the secured location, his eyes fell on Emily. Shock, anger, and disbelief flickered across his face. For the first time, the man who had controlled her realized that his power had been broken. Emily held her daughter in her arms, standing tall despite weeks of fear and trauma. Rex growled low and steady, his gaze fixed on the man. The dog's presence was more than a warning, it was a protective shield, instinctively communicating that any attempt to intimidate or harm Emily would be met with resistance. Emily's fiancé hesitated, and Daniel stepped forward, ensuring law enforcement maintained control of the situation. "This ends now," Daniel said firmly. "All of your threats, manipulations, and abuse are being documented. You will answer for them." Emily's voice, though quiet, was resolute. "I am not afraid anymore." The legal confrontation began immediately. Law enforcement presented the compiled evidence, threats, financial manipulations, witness accounts, and Emily's own testimony. The man's confident demeanor crumbled as the truth became undeniable. Attempts to intimidate Emily failed. She stood tall, holding her newborn, while Rex remained at her side, vigilant. The dog had saved her life once and now symbolized her courage and protection. Emily's past powerlessness transformed into empowerment, and those present understood that she would no longer be silenced. After hours of legal proceedings, Emily's fiancé was formally charged with multiple offenses: abuse, harassment, and threats against both Emily and her unborn child. Protective measures ensured he could not approach her or her family, and he was detained while investigations continued. The relief that washed over Emily was profound. She had faced the person who had haunted her life for months, and the justice system, combined with her courage and Rex's vigilance, had ensured that he could no longer threaten her or her child. Emily's emotions were overwhelming. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she held her daughter tightly. "We did it," she whispered to Daniel, her voice trembling. "We're safe now." Daniel smiled, his own relief tempered by the recognition of the emotional journey they had endured. "You did it. You survived, you protected your baby, and you stood up for yourself. Rex helped too. He's been your guardian every step of the way." The dog nudged Emily's arm, tail wagging, as though understanding the significance of the moment. The days that followed, Emily began to rebuild her life. The hospital became a sanctuary not just for recovery, but for planning the next steps. She worked with counselors to process the trauma, while Daniel coordinated with law enforcement to ensure ongoing protection. Rex remained her constant companion, a source of comfort and reassurance. Emily's trust in humans, fragile after months of abuse, slowly began to return, bolstered by the unwavering loyalty of her canine protector. Visitors came cautiously, friends and family carefully introduced to ensure Emily felt secure. She shared her story selectively, knowing that exposure could invite risk but also recognizing the importance of support. Each day she held her daughter closer, watching the baby's growth as a symbol of survival and resilience. Rex, ever vigilant, followed her throughout the hospital, ensuring that no threat went unnoticed. Together, they formed a triad of protection, hope, and healing. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily sat by the window with her daughter in her arms. Daniel stood nearby, reviewing documents for ongoing legal matters. Rex lay at Emily's feet, alert yet relaxed, the storm of the past months now receding into memory. Emily whispered softly to her child, recounting the journey, the fear, the storm, the cabin, and the unwavering loyalty of a dog who had guided them to safety. In her words, she imbued the baby with the lessons of courage, resilience, and hope. Though the threat of her fiancé's influence lingered in the background, Emily had reclaimed agency over her life. The combination of law enforcement, Daniel's vigilance, and Rex's instinct had ensured that the past could no longer dictate her future. She had survived the impossible: storm, isolation, fear, and abuse, and emerged not just alive but empowered. The baby's life, now safe, symbolized the triumph of perseverance over adversity. In the quiet hours of the hospital night, Emily reflected on how much she had endured. The cabin in Asheville, the relentless storm, the dark forests, the fear of being found, each challenge had tested her limits. Yet through it all she had survived. She had been found by Rex, protected by Daniel, and now justice had been served. The shadows of her past still lingered, but they no longer held power over her. She was free, and her daughter would grow in safety. Rex, sensing her contemplative mood, nudged Emily's hand. She smiled through her tears, feeling gratitude and love. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." The dog wagged his tail softly, his presence more than a comfort. It was a reminder that loyalty, courage, and instinct could save lives in ways no human could always achieve. Emily's life had been irrevocably changed, but in the best way possible. As dawn approached, Emily held her daughter close, feeling a profound sense of hope. She had faced her fears, confronted her abuser, and survived the storm. The journey had been harrowing, but she was no longer alone. Daniel and Rex had been by her side every step of the way, ensuring that she and her child could embrace a future free from fear. Outside, the world was calm, the remnants of the storm fading. Inside, a new chapter of life, courage, and protection had begun. Weeks had passed since the storm, the cabin, and the harrowing ordeal that had nearly claimed Emily Carter's life. The city of Charlotte was calm, a stark contrast to the chaos she had survived. The hospital had become more than a place of healing. It was a sanctuary where Emily and her newborn daughter had grown stronger each day. Daniel Brooks remained a steady presence at her side, coordinating with law enforcement and helping navigate the maze of protective measures still in place. Yet the true source of Emily's resilience lay in the loyal, vigilant German shepherd who never left her side. Rex, her silent guardian, had saved her life once and continued to do so every day. Emily cradled her daughter, the soft coos and tiny movements filling the room with warmth. For months she had lived in fear of discovery, fear of abuse, fear for her unborn child. But now she could finally breathe. The baby's life had been the driving force that carried her through forests, storms, and threats. Now holding the tiny, fragile bundle in her arms, Emily felt a sense of completeness she hadn't known in years. Her voice, soft but filled with emotion, whispered to her daughter, "We survived. We're safe now." Rex nudged her hand gently, as if affirming the promise. Daniel observed the scene quietly, heart swelling with relief. He had witnessed Emily's courage from the moment Rex had found her in the cabin to this final stage of safety and recovery. He knew the journey had been extraordinary, not only for her survival, but for the resilience she now displayed. He glanced at Rex, whose attentive gaze never wavered, and felt a profound respect for the dog whose instincts had been more reliable than any human plan. Without Rex, Emily might not have survived the storm or the ordeal that had followed. The legal battle, though ongoing, had reached a turning point. Emily's fiancé was in custody, charged with abuse, harassment, and other crimes. Protective orders ensured he could not approach Emily or her daughter, and authorities in Atlanta were pursuing further charges for his financial manipulations. The relief this brought Emily was palpable, yet she remained cautious. Trauma does not vanish instantly, and the months of fear had left deep imprints. Still, she had regained control over her life, and for the first time, she could imagine a future free from terror. Days turned into weeks, and Emily slowly resumed aspects of normal life. She worked with counselors to process the emotional scars, finding strength in the small victories. Her first walk outside without fear, the first time she smiled without hesitation, the first moment she laughed with her daughter. Each day reinforced the truth she had fought to believe. She was no longer a victim, she was a survivor. Rex remained ever vigilant, a comforting presence and reminder of the loyalty and courage that had guided her through the darkest hours. One crisp morning, Emily took her daughter for a short stroll around the hospital grounds, Daniel walking beside her. The baby cooed happily, unaware of the horrors her mother had faced. Emily breathed in the fresh air, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease. "I can't believe we made it," she whispered, glancing down at the child. Daniel smiled. "You didn't just make it, you thrived, and we'll keep making sure you thrive." Rex trotted alongside them, alert but relaxed, ever ready to respond to any threat, yet enjoying the simple peace of the day. Emily reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The storm that had forced her into hiding, the weeks of terror in the cabin, and the tense days leading up to her baby's birth were all behind her. Every hardship had tested her courage, but it had also revealed the depth of loyalty, love, and determination she could draw upon. Daniel had been unwavering, and Rex had been extraordinary, saving her life more than once. Together, they had turned fear into hope, isolation into protection, and danger into survival. As they returned to the hospital room, Emily noticed how much her perspective had shifted. She had once believed that she was powerless, that her life and her child's life were entirely controlled by her fiancé's threats. Now, she understood her own strength and the power of allies who truly cared. Rex rested near the bed, head on his paws, while Emily held her daughter close, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She had survived the storm, and now she was free to live on her own terms. Later, Emily shared her story with a small circle of trusted friends and family. She spoke openly about her fears, the abuse she had endured, and the miraculous rescue by Rex. Her voice, though still tinged with emotion, carried a tone of strength and triumph. The reactions of those who listened ranged from tears to admiration, but all recognized the extraordinary courage she had displayed. The story of survival against impossible odds, guided by a loyal dog and the unwavering support of a devoted officer, left an indelible mark on everyone who heard it. As Emily's daughter grew, she became the embodiment of hope and new beginnings. Every milestone, her first smile, first steps, first laugh, was a reminder of the journey her mother had endured. Emily taught her child about resilience, courage, and the importance of trust, and every day Rex remained close, a silent guardian ensuring that the family was safe. Emily often whispered to him, "You saved us. You're our hero." Rex responded with gentle nudges and soft whines, acknowledging the bond they shared, a bond forged in fear, strengthened in survival, and celebrated in love. Months passed, and Emily's life began to stabilize. She moved into a secure home, fully protected from past threats, and created a nurturing environment for her daughter. The trauma of abuse lingered, but with support she began to heal emotionally. She took comfort in the routines of everyday life, walks in the park, quiet evenings at home, and the simple joy of watching her child grow. Rex remained her constant companion, alert and protective, yet content to enjoy the peace he had helped create. Emily often reflected on the improbable chain of events that had led to this life. The storm, the cabin, the relentless pursuit by her abuser, each obstacle had seemed insurmountable at the time. Yet through courage, determination, and the loyalty of a dog who refused to abandon her, she had survived. Daniel had been a steadfast protector and ally, but Rex's instincts and presence had been the thread that tied it all together. She realized that life had given her a second chance, and she vowed to honor it fully. On a quiet evening, Emily sat with her daughter in her lap, watching the sunset from the secure home she now called her own. Rex lay nearby, ears twitching at every distant sound, ever vigilant yet calm. Emily whispered softly, "We made it through together." The baby cooed, reaching for her mother's face, and Emily smiled, tears of relief and joy streaming down her cheeks. She had survived storms both literal and metaphorical, faced unimaginable fear, and emerged stronger. The future was no longer a source of dread. It was filled with hope, love, and security. The journey of Emily Carter, her newborn daughter, Daniel Brooks, and Rex the German Shepherd had reached a powerful, emotional conclusion. From the storm-ravaged cabin in Asheville to the tense hospital room in Charlotte, and finally to the sanctuary of their new home, they had faced every obstacle with courage, loyalty, and resilience. The shadows of the past no longer held power over them. Life, love, and protection had prevailed. Rex had led the way, Daniel had guided the path, and Emily had claimed her life back. Together, they had survived the impossible and discovered a future worth living for. As night fell, Emily watched her daughter sleep, Rex curled protectively nearby. Daniel glanced at them, a quiet smile on his face. The trials were over, and the family, bound by courage, trust, and loyalty, had emerged victorious. Emily whispered once more, "Thank you, Rex, for everything." The dog's soft whine, the gentle wag of his tail, and the warmth of his presence conveyed all the gratitude and understanding words could not. In that moment, surrounded by safety, love, and the promise of new beginnings, Emily finally knew peace.